Welcome to PMR, Paleo Magazine Radio, where we bring you paleo nutrition, exercise, and lifestyle perspectives from both the experts and the everyday. PMR is brought to you by Paleo Magazine, the first and only print magazine dedicated to the paleo lifestyle, and is hosted by Tony Federico.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Paleo Magazine Radio. Habits. We all have them, but sometimes they just aren't working for us. Whether it's breaking a bad habit or starting a good one, it's easy to get stuck, to feel frustrated and just give up. But fortunately for you, we have a special guest today. Gretchen Rubin, author of Better Than Before, Mastering the Habits of Our Everyday Lives, joins us here at Paleo Magazine Radio to show you how you can hack your own personal habit style, unlocking hidden potential for success in business, health, and all other aspects of your life. And then in the second half of the show, Stephanie Gaudreau joins us for another installment of Stupid Awesome Info. Stephanie has recently started her own podcast, Harder to Kill, so I wanted to talk to her about some of the hidden benefits of podcasting. You can imagine that talking to some of the smartest, most inspirational, and effective people on the planet would do a person some good, and it does. But before we get into the show, I'm excited to announce that today's episode is sponsored by PrepDish.com. With PrepDish.com, you get weekly meal plans for efficiently preparing delicious, healthy meals like smoky paprika chicken with roasted carrots, parsnips and fennel, and chipotle, bison, and kale chili. There's a paleo as well as a gluten-free option, and you can get one full month for only $4. That's $10 off the regular price by going to prepdish.com/paleo magazine. I personally wanted to know more about prepdish.com, so I called up founder Allison Stevens Schaff, a longtime personal chef, to find out why people signed up for the service. And here's what she had to say.
It's always time. And I worked with clients, there were sort of celebrity clients, people with all this money, and yes, they wanted health. Yes, they wanted taste. They wanted all these things. But what it comes down to is people are busy. They want to save time. There does have to be some amount of food prep that takes place if you want to eat healthy. But then the system that I've devised is basically just the most efficient way to get food on the table. It's sort of like the concept behind 4-Hour Work Week where you're batching stuff, So this is batch cooking. So you're spending 2 to 3 hours on Sunday versus, scrambling each night, and you end up, next thing you know, you've spent an hour putting together this meal, and or you've given up and just, grabbed something frozen or takeout.
PrepDish.com, saving you from fast food, one meal plan at a time. Remember to go to PrepDish.com/Paleo Magazine for $10 off your first month. And now it's time for the show. So prepare yourself for good habits. Paleo Magazine Radio starts now. I'm here with Gretchen Rubin. Gretchen is a New York Times best-selling author. She has books such as The Happiness Project, Happier at Home, and her most current release, Better Than Before. They're all #1 bestsellers. She's got a podcast that she's hosting with her sister as well. Again, it's right at the top of the charts. She's making things happen in the realm of happiness and habits, and I'm pleased to have her on our program. Gretchen, welcome.
Oh, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be talking to you.
Nice. So let's just get into a little of your personal history before we start talking about how we can hack habits and get into the success zone with our diet and our exercise and all these other things that we try to change about ourselves. I saw that you were a lawyer before you became an author. How did that transition occur?
Well, when I look back on my life, I had done everything a person would do to prepare herself to be a writer in my education and in my habits. But I went to law school, like many a person before me. I'm good at research and writing, and it'll keep my options open. And I was actually clerking for Sandra Day O'Connor. So
you're doing pretty well in the lawyering field.
When I realized that I really wanted to be a writer. At that time, I was working on a big project just for fun. And it finally occurred to me, this is something that I'm doing in my free time, but this is something that some people do for their jobs.
Right.
And at a certain point, my husband and I were moving from D.C. to New York, and I thought, well, this is a juncture that makes sense for me to try. And I thought at that point, I'd rather fail as a writer than succeed as a lawyer. So why don't I try and either fail or succeed and see what happens. And so, I got a book called How to Write and Sell Your Nonfiction Book Proposal and followed the directions and made the switch to being a writer.
Well, it sounds like that's a book we all should be reading because it seems like it worked pretty well for you.
Yeah. No, looking back on it, I'm amazed it all worked out so well.
Yeah.
At the time, it seemed difficult, but looking back, it went pretty smoothly, I have to say.
Now, did you know what you wanted to write about at that point?
I did. And that was something that was very fortunate because a lot of times people, I've talked to a lot of people who want to change professions. It's certainly a big happiness challenge.
Sure.
And a lot of times a person knows they want to leave something, but they don't know where they want to go, and so they know they don't like what they have, but they need to figure, and that's when you have to read What Color Is My Parachute and do all that really intense, uncomfortable self-searching to try to figure out, well, what do I really want? What am I good at? What do I like to do? But I was fortunate because I was thinking that I didn't want to be a lawyer, but I was already deep working on this project, which actually turned into my first book, which was called Power, Money, Fame, Sex, A User's Guide.
Oh, nice.
Which is a book I loved writing. But so I knew I wanted to leave, but I also knew where I wanted to go. And so that made things much clearer because it was just a question of, can I turn this into a book? Can I write a book proposal? Can I get an agent? Can I sell this? I knew what I wanted. Whereas some people, they have to figure out what they want, as well as accept the fact that they want to change.
Right. So the challenge is twofold rather than kind of a singular challenge.
So for me, it was challenging, but I knew the destination that I was aiming for.
Absolutely. Now, we can certainly get into this a little bit later in our conversation talking about habits, but how did you get into the habit of being a writer? How did you transition just personally in terms of the flow of your day from having a structured career where you have to be dressed in a particular way and you have to be somewhere at a particular time and you have to, do things according to a schedule to really kind of being accountable just yourself?
Well, that is a question that has puzzled me over the years. But when I was doing the research for my book, Better Than Before, which is all about habit formation, I learned the answer, which is that I found that, when you talk about habits, there's no pre-existing way to talk about how you're different from me. I'm different from somebody else. How do I line up in comparison to other people? So I had to develop that. So I came up with this 4 tendencies quiz. I divide all of human nature into 4 tendencies: upholder, questioner, obliger, and rebel. And there's a quiz on my site, GretchenRubin.com, if you want to take a quiz and see what you are.
I took the quiz.
Oh, you did? What are you?
Absolutely. So I noticed that, so again, reading your book and doing the quiz, I noticed we have a couple things in common.
Yeah.
Both have a spouse named Jamie.
Well, yeah, good.
Both upholders.
Excellent, yes.
And we've both had books that have been the answer to a Jeopardy question. So
excellent.
I thought that was kind of funny.
There you go.
It kind of makes sense that doing the things that I'm doing, it really kind of shined some light. Upholder, I would say, with some obliger tendencies.
Well, obligers and upholders share the fact that they both readily meet outer expectations. So you're half crossover with an obliger. So an upholder, just for people who don't know, are people who readily meet inner and outer expectations. And this is a very small tendency. Not that many people are in this tendency. But so a lot of times people would say, well, how did you organize your day? How did you discipline yourself to write? But you didn't have the structure of an office and blah. And I was like, well, it just wasn't that hard. But now I know why. Because for upholders, that isn't that hard. And a lot of times upholders get into the business of telling other people how to change their habits. But in fact, we're not very reliable because for us, it comes easily. So that's why we're very attracted to things like habits, because for us, they come easily and we see the benefits for them. We have a very positive association with them. But not that many people are upholders. But so for me, making that transition was very effortless because it's not hard. I don't need supervision. I don't need deadlines. Sure. I'm really good at generating my own aims and following through with them. That's not what I find challenging.
Now, I think that was the coolest thing about reading your book is sort of this understanding that we're all different in terms of how we lean into taking on a habit and whether we embrace it wholeheartedly or whether or not we resist it. I've been a personal trainer for many years, and I know firsthand that I have clients who tell me straight up, I would not come into the gym if I did not have an appointment with you. And I'm like, oh, we have an obliger here.
Yes.
Or people who will sign up for a personal training session and literally never show up. Rebels. So it really kind of made a lot of sense within the fitness realm based on my personal experiences that there are people, they kind of fall into these general categories. And it's where your internal locus of control is what I'm kind of seeing.
Well, absolutely. And I think this is a really key thing to emphasize about habit formation is I think that a lot of times when you're reading about habits, there's a sort of an assumption that there's a magic one-size-fits-all solution.
Right.
We could only find the answer. If we could only find that glass slipper that would fit everybody's foot, then we'd all have good habits. But that's obviously not true, right? Or we would all have perfect habits by now.
Exactly.
The fact is, it's what works for you. You know, Tony might be, it sounds like we're very much the same, but in other ways we could be very different from each other. And so it's helpful to hear what other people are doing, but you really can't say, oh, well, this worked for my sister-in-law or this worked for Steve Jobs, therefore it will work for me, because it might not. And one way that I see this coming up a lot in a very obvious way is with the advice, which you see over and over, which is if something's important to you, do it first thing in the morning. If you want to exercise, do it first thing in the morning. Now, this makes perfect sense on paper. It would work for me because I'm a morning person. But the fact is, there are night people. Some people are morning people. Some people are night people. This is like a hardwired thing. It's not something that you could just go to bed earlier and make yourself into a morning person. And if you are a night person, you can probably barely get out of bed in time to get to work on time or to get your kids off to school. And trying to get up early to go for a 3-mile run, it's just you're setting yourself up for failure. For you, it would work better to do it later in the day. I get all the reasons why it makes sense to do it first thing in the morning, but that's not what will work for you because you're a night person. So you have to do it in the way that's going to work for you. And when I've talked to people about habits, and I'm sure you see this if you're a personal trainer, people get really discouraged because they've tried and failed with an important habit and they don't understand why. They're like, I'm totally motivated. It's important to me. Like they feel bad about themselves. And to me, I'm like, don't blame yourself. Set it up in another way.
Exactly.
There's a lot of other ways to skin a cat. And if you find the way that suits you better, you're just much more likely to stick to it. But there's a lot of things to think about, which is what Better Than Before is about. I think sometimes people are like, oh my gosh, there's 21 strategies. Like it's too much. Am I this? Am I that? But I don't think it's actually that complicated when you read through it. And that's what really works. Because when you suit yourself, then you set yourself up for success.
Yeah, you're just kind of laying it out. These are the tendencies. These are the distinctions. These are the different ways that you might lean towards or away from something. And I think reading through it, people are going to naturally relate to different things. And they're going to say, hey, that sounds like me. So it's not like you're taking all of it on. You're just sort of taking the slice that's more applicable to your own personality.
Yeah. And I think for most people, it's like it really resonates with them. Like they know right away if they're a simplicity lover or an abundance lover. And it's like, well, if you're a simplicity lover, you're probably going to do better in this kind of environment. If you're an abundance lover, that's probably not going to appeal to you. So these are all things to think about, like you want to get back into the habit of exercising. Okay, well, these are things to think about. Like, how do you set yourself up to make it as easy as possible for that habit to stick? Because if you set it up in the wrong way, you might not get very far before you give up.
And I love how you start with self-knowledge because that's so important no matter what you're doing. I mean, this podcast ostensibly is about the paleo diet, and even within what seems like a pretty rigid dietary framework, pretty much everybody at this point understands that you have to know yourself first. You have to know what foods you're going to eat. You have to know what foods you don't tolerate. And so even in something such as paleo, which seems relatively narrow from perhaps an outsider's perspective, it's still all about customization. It's still all about personalization, and you really have to know yourself in order to go through that process. So I was going to say, if you're game, could we run through, a basic thing like trying to eat better, for example, and how would somebody of the 4 tendencies go about that?
Okay. Well, an upholder is probably going to find it pretty easy to do something if they make up their mind to do it. So if they want to keep a food journal, if they want to bring lunch from home instead of eating fast food, if they want to eat paleo, probably it's not going to be that challenging for them. They just have to be very specific about what they're expecting from themselves, which is true for everyone. You don't want to say things like, I'm going to eat healthier. You want to say things like, I'm going to eliminate potatoes and rice from my diet, or I'm going to eat breakfast every day. You want to be very specific with yourself. So that's for an upholder. For a questioner, it's really about justification. For questioners, it's very important because, again, let me step back and lay out the framework. This has to do with how you meet an expectation. An outer expectation, which is something like a work deadline, or an inner expectation, which is like your own New Year's resolution. So upholders readily meet outer and inner expectations alike. So they keep a work deadline, they keep a New Year's resolution without much fuss. So they decide to change their eating habits. They can do that fairly easily.
Sure.
Questioners resist outer expectations, but they readily meet inner expectations. So they make everything into an inner expectation because what they want is justification. They want reasons. They hate anything inefficient or irrational or unfair. And it's very important to them, why am I listening to you? What's your authority? What's your expertise? Like, why am I going to take your word for it? They always want to be convinced. And so for a questioner, it might be really important to read several books or, read Gary Taubes' Why We Get Fat. Read Ty Schultz's The Big Fat Surprise. There's a million books about paleo. Like, why are we doing this? Like, what's important here? What's the logic? What are the studies showing? What's the research? If I'm listening to this person, what are their credentials? Like, why am I doing it? When I gave up carbs, basically, I gave it up as an upholder. I read Why We Get Fat by Gary Taubes. I was like, I'm convinced.
Yeah.
I've just changed everything overnight. My father's a questioner.
He's like, I don't buy it.
Well, no, he wasn't like, I don't buy it. He's like, I'm intrigued. And I was like, read this book. And I'm like, read this book. Oh, here's this study. Here's this article and everything. And he was like, yeah.
He just had to wrap his mind around it.
Yes, he needed to see the reasons for it. But I will say, just to digress on that point, one of the most powerful, convincing things for him was my example, which I call data point of one, which is when one person that has good success with something, that's often more convincing than a giant study that applies to an entire country. You're like, man, that worked. And I was like, Dad, I'm not hungry. I'm eating all this amazing food that I haven't eaten for years. I've lost 10 pounds without trying. Like, it's amazing. And he was like, oh, well, so I'm supposed to be eating scrambled eggs and bacon for breakfast instead of oatmeal? Like,
sounds pretty good.
I want to learn more about that. Now, obligers readily meet outer expectations, but they struggle to meet inner expectations. So they readily meet a work deadline, but they struggle to keep the New Year's resolution. And this is the people that you say who come to you at the gym who say, Tony, the only reason I'm here is because you're here. I need the fact that you're waiting for me here, that we've got an appointment, I'm taking somebody else's slot.
Put some money on the table.
There's money on the table. I feel an external expectation to get here. But if it was just me saying like, oh, I'm sitting here drinking my coffee, I should go for a run, that's not going to happen.
Right.
And finally, rebels resist all expectations, outer and inner alike. They want to do what they want to do when they want to do it in their own way. If you ask or tell them to do something, they're very likely to resist. And here's the thing about rebels. Often, even if it's something that they want to do, if it's put on the calendar and there is an expectation that they show up, they won't do it because they're like, I can't stand the fact that someone is telling me what to do, even if I'm the one telling me what to do. If there's an appointment for me to meet Tony at the gym, I'm not going to go. He's not the boss of me. No, I'm not the boss of me. I'm totally free. I'm not going to go. So to go back to your original question about how would the different folks, so for the upholder, it wouldn't be very hard. For the questioner, it's all about the rationale, the justification, the studies, the expertise of the person advising them to do it. For the obliger, it's that external expectation. So they need to work out with a trainer. They need to have an accountability partner. They need to take a dog who's going to tear up the house and pee all over everything if they don't take them for a run. They need to work out with a friend who's going to be annoyed if they don't show up. They need to take a class where if they don't show up, the teacher's going to notice that they're not there, or they're going to take someone else's slot. They can think about things like their own duty as a role model. Oh, I want my children to see me exercising because I know that it's important for health and I want to model that for my children. Some of those things take money. And a way that you can, for free, create accountability is to form an accountability group. And there is a starter kit on my website, GretchenRubin.com, for starting a habits accountability group. Because a lot of obligers have told me that if you have an accountability partner, like one other person, if that person loses interest or like has to travel a lot for work or gets distracted,
all falls apart.
It all falls apart. And so if you have an accountability group, there's more energy there, there's more ideas, more enthusiasm, but there's also more consistency because the group is going to have more adherence.
Yeah, it's a little more robust.
It's more robust. And now for the rebel, and
this is the hard one.
Well, this is what's funny because when I wrote the book, I talked about what worked for rebels, but I thought, rebels don't really want habits, so they're not going to really care for me to go into it at length. Well, I've been deluged with emails from rebels saying, I'm a rebel. Tell me more about how I can form good habits. This is the thing about a rebel. If a rebel wants to eat better, the rebel must act from choice and from freedom and from authentic identity. So the rebel should always be thinking, this is what I want. This is what I like. This is the kind of person that I am. So I love fresh vegetables and delicious home-cooked meals. I like to cook myself. And then also with a rebel, there's also a strong element of I'll show you and also a resistance to anybody being controlled. So you might say, I'm not going to be suckered by the advertisements by the big food industry. I'm not going to be addicted to carbs. I'm going to be free. Like my sister said, well, now I'm free from French fries. She gave up French fries, being free. And they also like to do things that are unconventional. And so it's like, ooh, I don't eat the way everybody else eats. I eat in this special way that's exactly suited to me. This is what I choose. And so a good friend of mine is a rebel who also eats very low carb. And it's interesting because I get there as an upholder, but he gets there as a rebel. If you look at us from the outside, we eat very much the same, but our inner process is very different.
Sure. Destination may be the same, journey very different.
Yes. And this is the thing about a tendency. You can't look to somebody from the outside and know their tendency. You have to know why they're doing what they're doing, because you can get to almost any kind of pattern of behavior from a tendency. It's just that the logic that you would use would be very different. And, if you're around a rebel, a lot of times the I'll show you is very strong. So I know somebody who was like, I don't think a man your age could give up sugar. You're too addicted. There's no way you could give it up. And it's like, well, I'll show you.
Right. Just know how to push the buttons.
Watch me, And the people around him knew him very well and knew how to push his buttons.
Now, I wanted to ask you about some sort of commonly held kind of myths around habits. Did you find any validity to this thing that we all kind of say, and everybody repeats it, that you have to do something X number of times, whether it's 30 days or 90 days, in order for it to become a habit? That sounds like one of those one-size-fits-all sorts of things. Did you find that to be true through your research and your personal experience?
Alas, it is not true. A mere repetition is not enough to make a habit form. And I think we've all experienced this, where sometimes a habit will form really quickly, too quickly sometimes. And then habits, you'll think that you'll have a habit for a very long time and it will vanish overnight. I try to explain how that can happen, because often people are very puzzled about why a seemingly cemented in habit suddenly vanishes. So what's
like the falling off the wagon phenomenon?
Yeah, why is that? There's things that you can look for. Once somebody points them out to you, they're often pretty clear, but you sort of need to know what to look for. So no, it's too bad, because it would be lovely if you just 21 days, 30 days. But there was a study done at the University of College London, and they sort of said, well, on average, it's 66 days. But that doesn't really tell you anything, because what that means is some take longer, some take shorter. Some people formed habits very easily. Some never really formed habits at all, which, of course, I'm like, yes, that's right, because some people are upholders and some people are rebels. And so it basically says it just depends. So there is no magic number of repetitions that will do it for you.
Interesting. So we can kind of put that myth aside and focus a little bit more on self-awareness. Now, when you actually get a habit going, let's say you understand that you're personally a rebel and you manage to get that habit going, how do you keep that habit going? How do you carry the ball throughout the duration of the habit's useful life? Because that's a distinction that you make as well, not being a slave to your habits, but still maintain your position as the master, but use the habits wisely. How do you keep those habits going?
Well, that's an interesting question for rebel, because it's different for a rebel than it would be for the other three tendencies. And I have to say, rebel is by far the smallest tendency. Very, very, very few people are rebels. It's a conspicuous tendency, but it's a very small tendency.
Kind of stands out, I guess.
But the upholder tendency, the one that you and I are in, is actually extremely small too. It's only slightly larger than the rebels, which came as a big surprise to me. I have to say, when I was writing the book, many things became clear to me when I understood that actually very few people are upholders. Overwhelmingly, people are questioners or obligers.
Interesting.
So when you say about how to stick to a habit, there are a lot of things to do. And generally, why habits are helpful is that by putting a behavior on autopilot, they free us from having to use decision-making and self-control, which are very draining.
Right.
People often say to me, like, I want to go through my day making healthy choices. And I'm like, no, you don't. Because every time you make a choice, you have the opportunity to make the wrong choice. You want to choose once and stop choosing. You're not like, oh, should I go to my workout with Tony today? It's like, no, I just go.
Yep, don't think about it. That's just what you do.
Yeah, it's just what you do. It's just your habit. So habits are freeing and energizing because they get us out of that business of choosing.
It's like an efficiency thing.
It's an efficiency thing. And the brain wants to make things into habits because it is an efficiency thing. And it means the brain is free to think about novel or complex or unusual situations. And so it's a bandwidth thing. However, for rebels, they resist anything that is on a schedule. They resist the idea of a habit. So they want to choose. Now, to an upholder like you or me, that sounds very exhausting. I don't want to choose every time. I want to go. I don't want to have to feel like I feel like doing something. I just want to do it whether or not I feel like doing it. But for Rebel, it's very important to choose and to feel free to be picky. I feel like running today because it makes me feel so energetic, and I love being out in the sunshine. I love having the wind in my hair. I love having the chance to listen to music. I want to go running today.
Yeah.
And tomorrow I'm going to want to go running again too. But also, Rebels can often have habit-like behaviors when they tie it to an aspect of their identity, because authenticity and self-expression are very high values for Rebels. And so the idea that this is who I am. I'm a healthy, energetic person. I'm a good leader. I'm a good father. I'm a responsible citizen. Then they can do things that they might otherwise resist from their rebel nature. Like, let's say you wanted to be a good leader. Well, you might be able to go to a staff meeting on time every time because you feel like, well, that's what a good leader would do. Even though every ounce of your rebelness is like, I don't want to go to that meeting. I don't want to go on time. I hate doing things that are routine. They can't make me, all that stuff. But maybe they could if it's tied to their identity. So if you think about your identity as a rebel, often that can help you keep your good habits. I'm a principled vegan, or I'm paleo. I am paleo. That's what I am. Therefore, I can do all the things that are an expression of my identity. As one rebel said to me, if it's expressing my identity, it's not a chain holding me to the ground. It's pulling me up to where I want to be. But they have to focus on that identity. So that would be a way a rebel would get there, through choice, through freedom, through identity.
And you identify some strategies, things like pairing, for example, or how to use rewards. Can you talk a little bit about those strategies and some of the ones that you think are, I guess, going to give you the most bang for your buck?
Well, pairing is a really fun strategy, and it's very easy, which is that you just take something that you want yourself to do that you're having trouble with, and you pair it with something that you want to do or that you must do. Let's say you needed to take medication every day, and you just, for whatever reason, couldn't get yourself to take your pill every day, but you were addicted to your morning coffee. Well, you might say, okay, I'm going to keep my pill, instead of keeping my pill case in my medicine cabinet in my bathroom by my bedroom, I'm going to keep my pill case in front of my coffee pot. And every morning, before I have my first cup of coffee, I have to have that pill. They're paired together. It's not a reward. You're not like, oh, I'm rewarding myself for taking my pill by having the coffee. It's just that if I want the coffee, I have to have the pill. They only go together. And it's like, oh, well, I forgot my pills upstairs. I'll go run and get them later, so I'll go ahead and have my cup of coffee. No, there is no coffee until the pill is taken. That's pairing.
I've heard people, for example, they have a favorite TV show, and so they're like, you know what? I'm only going to watch that show if I'm walking on the treadmill. And it's like, bundle those two together, and that's how they make it happen.
100%. And as you mentioned, I have a new podcast with my sister called Happier with Gretchen Rubin. And many people have said, oh, I've paired your podcast with going for a walk.
Nice.
I can only listen to your podcast if I'm walking. And I'm like, that's so great.
Perfect.
Because I would love to be the pairing that would encourage you to be walking. But yeah, for a lot of people, TV work. It's like, I shouldn't be watching all this reality TV, but hey, I'm on the treadmill. But I can't watch it if I'm not on the treadmill. Those two things go together. Now, a strategy that might be very interesting to your listeners is the strategy of abstaining. And this is a strategy that works very well for some people, but does not work at all for others. So again, this is a thing where you have to know yourself, because the advice that works very well for other people might not work for you. So the strategy of abstaining is pointing out that for some people, abstainers, it's much easier to resist a strong temptation by giving up something altogether. It's easier for them to have none than to have a little bit.
Sure.
Back when I was eating sugar, I could have, no Thin Mint cookies, or I could have 7 Thin Mint cookies, but it was very hard for me it was impossible for me to have 1 Thin Mint cookie. I could never have half a dish of ice cream. Once I start, I had to go all the way. Now, moderators, by contrast, they get kind of panicky and rebellious if they're told they can never have something, and so they like to have a little bit, or they like to have it sometimes. These are the people who keep the bar of fine chocolate in their desk drawer, and once a day, or every other day, they have like 1 square of fine chocolate.
Right, and they savor that 1 square, and they're good.
My whole day would be 1 square, 2 squares, 3 squares, later, today, tomorrow, it's my birthday. I mean, I'm going to eat that whole bar of chocolate. Like, there's no way I would have 1 square. And the fact is, there's no right way or wrong way. It's just whatever works for you. But a lot of times people are told, oh, you should give yourself a cheat day. Oh, if you are so rigid with yourself, it's not healthy. But for an abstainer, that's what works. That's what's easier for us. And so I found, like, when I gave up sugar, oh my gosh, the world became so much easier. And sometimes people say to me, well, you just have so much discipline. You have so much self-control, it's easy for you. I'm like, no, I don't have enough self-control to eat some sugar. It's much easier for me to eat none than to have a little bit because I'm 100% an abstainer. But
you're taking self-control off the table.
Yeah, there's no self-control because there's no decision. Do I eat this? No, I don't. Am I going to have dessert? No, I'm not. Oh, there's a little dish of like miniature candy bars at the reception desk. Am I going to have one? No, I'm not. Why? Because I don't eat sugar. It's so easy, and all that noise just fades away. Now, but for moderators, that would not be a good strategy because they get very weirded out if they're told they can never have something. So for them, it's important to have it sometimes, to have a little bit. Now, just as I was saying, a lot of times people who are in our kind of jobs are upholders. Turns out that nutritionists are almost all moderators. So they give moderator advice. You know, they'll say things like, many nutritionists have said to me things like, it's not healthy to be so rigid. Or if you deny yourself this stuff all the time, you're just going to fall off the wagon and lose control and binge. Or you should learn to moderate yourself. And I'm like, why should I learn to moderate myself? It's too hard for me. My way works for me. Your way works for you. There's no right. There's no wrong. It's just whatever works for a person. And the funny thing is like once I identified this, and I've written about it on my blog and in my books, I've heard from so many people who are like, oh my gosh, like I've been trying my whole life to be moderate. And I didn't know that there was this other path and that I'm like one of this other tribe of people, abstainers. And now I've given up flour and sugar and I've lost 30 pounds and it's so easy for me. Or, I just gave up alcohol altogether and I'm so much happier. Like if you're an abstainer, that is easier. But again, I'm not saying that's the right way. I'm just saying for a certain kind of person facing a strong temptation. Now, with everybody, when it's not a strong temptation, you can be moderate. And also, this isn't just food. This is a lot of times technology. Like, my sister had to delete Candy Crush. She's like, Candy Crush is actually interfering with my career. She had to get rid of it.
Oh, man. Yeah, that one I think is a common one.
TiVo. It's like, man, if you can't handle it, there's video games, there's websites,
Totally.
Sometimes you just have to, like, say, I can't have a little bit.
Goes back to the self-knowledge thing.
Goes right back to self-knowledge. Right back.
Now, tell me a little bit about the loophole spotting. I just want to finish on that one because I think that that's something that some people are really good at, is finding the loopholes.
We're all so good at it, right? I mean, you must hear them every single day.
Oh, yeah.
So loophole is when we can all take a break from a good habit. We're all grown-ups. We can all do what we want. We can all plan an exception. Oh, I'm going to go to France for my anniversary. I'm going to do XYZ. Okay, fine. Yeah. You're breaking your good habit on purpose. A loophole is when you're like, I'm totally committed to sticking to my good habits. I'm walking in here. I'm going to order healthfully. But, oh, my goodness, hang on. At the spur of the moment, it just occurred to me, you only live once. Or, oh, everybody else is going to feel uncomfortable if I don't order dessert. Or what's one piece of cake in the scheme of an entire life? Or, it doesn't matter what I eat today because starting tomorrow I'm going to be so good. Or, oh, I've been so good, I deserve to have this piece of cake. Those are all loopholes. So we're so good at being advocates for ourselves and generating loopholes. And so the strategy of loophole spotting is one of the 21 strategies that you can use to make or break your habits. And this is the strategy that you identify those loopholes, because a lot of times they sort of run right below our conscious mind. Like we're invoking them without really understanding what we're doing. And what I found is once you really point out there are 10 categories of loopholes. Once you point them out, and I have lots of examples in there, and I loved I had to cut out like 7,000 examples because my hobby was just getting more and more and more examples of loopholes. Once you see them, and usually people have one or two favorites of categories that they really pull on, then you can catch yourself and you can say to yourself, okay, I feel a loophole coming on. Now that I've spotted that loophole, do I want to resist it? And from what I've seen is that once you know the categories of loopholes and sort of recognize which are your go-tos, it's much easier to resist them because you're like, you know what? It's a loophole. I'm not innocent. I'm not like, oh, wait, I'm totally off the hook. This doesn't count. That's one of the most popular ones. This doesn't count. It's my birthday. It's the holiday season. And I hurt my foot. I'm under so much stress.
It's TGIF. It's the weekend. It's Monday.
Everything counts. Everything counts. Nothing stays in Vegas. And so,
right.
But loopholes are tons of fun because people are so creative. And I mean, I've sat with people where they will cycle through 3, 4, 5 categories of loopholes in one breath. They're just generating
rattling them off.
Rattling them off. My favorite loophole, I have to confess, is the false choice loophole, which is when you sort of pose two things as if you can only have one or the other. Like, I'm so busy writing, I don't have time to go to the gym.
Oh, right.
Really? Are you truly writing 18 hours a day solid at your desk? Like, there's really no time for anything else? Because I don't think that's true. Questionable assumption. Oh, maybe you've heard this one. One of my favorite questionable assumptions. The label says it's healthy.
Oh, yeah. It says it right there.
Yeah, it says right there. It has to be healthy, right? Or, I've been working out, so this extra weight I've gained is all muscle.
Oh, yeah.
Questionable assumption. Questionable assumption. Moral licensing. Oh, I worked out this morning, so I deserve to have these 3 beers.
I did really good for breakfast and lunch, and then dinner I'm going to treat myself.
Yeah, they are fun to spot. It's a good game.
Now, a lot of your work is distinctions between different sort of personality types and different strategies and things like that. But I just wanted to finish with things that are kind of consistent among everybody, really. These are just sort of like the basic habit tenets. And you identify things like getting clear on the goals. Can you talk a little bit about that? I think that would be a good way to kind of bring everything home.
Yeah, one of them, as you say, is just like being very clear with what you expect from yourself, because the clearer you are about what you expect from yourself, the easier it is to follow through. There is a strategy called the strategy of foundation, and that is when you're trying to change your habits and just generally in life, what we need is self-mastery. And self-mastery is a very good thing to have. Like, we all want to have lots of self-mastery, but self-mastery is draining. And so there are certain areas that go right to self-mastery. And so if you're going to start anywhere, if you're going to think about where you should begin or like what's universal, it's really helpful to think about the strategy of foundation. And that's getting enough sleep. Because if you are exhausted, everything else is going to be harder. It affects your mood, your memory, your immune function, certainly your self-mastery. Everything feels harder. And that's when you start doing things like sleeping late instead of exercising, eating a pint of ice cream at midnight, because you're so drained, you have no self-mastery. And so when those impulses come, they're the master of you. The other thing is eating and drinking. Weirdly, one reason that people eat badly is they don't eat enough. You skip breakfast, you skip lunch, and then you're so hungry and you're so depleted that you're just like, you can't, you're just like eating everything in the kitchen. And you're much more likely to go to the pantry than you are to the fridge, right?
Sure.
Like those easy foods and crinkly packages seem a lot more alluring than like, oh, I'm going to cook up some eggs.
Yeah, saute some vegetables.
I'm so hungry. I don't have time for that, And again, when you're hungry, your self-mastery starts to drop. And then drinking. I mean, part of the fun of drinking alcohol is that it lowers inhibitions, which is like exactly the opposite of keeping your good habits. So that is what it is. Exercise, and it doesn't have to be like working out with a trainer, like that's great. But if you're even just going for a walk for 15 minutes, especially if you're outside, that's going to give you a boost of energy and self-mastery. And here's something that really surprised me. Because those other 3, eating, drinking, exercising, sleep, that's obvious, right? It's like you need to be reminded, but it's not like that's a newsflash. For many, many people, outer order contributes to inner calm and inner self-mastery.
I'm feeling it.
There's something about getting control over the stuff of life that makes you feel more in control of your life generally.
You got to feng shui that room.
Yeah, and you clean off your desk. You get rid of all the junk in your closets. You get rid of the stuff you don't need, that you don't use, that doesn't work, that you don't even recognize. I remember one time I was forcing my husband to go through his closet, and I held up this pair of pants. He's like, I have never seen that pair of pants before in my life. And I'm like, well, they're in their closet, and they don't have tags on them, so I guess a robber came in here and left them. Yeah, they're your pants. There's something about it that like, and people will often say to me, I feel so energized. I feel so free. I feel so light. Now everything seems possible. There's just this kind of jolt of creativity and energy and like feeling of possibility that comes from it. It's kind of bizarre to me, really. It doesn't seem like it should matter so much, like in the context of a happy life and like good habits. Why does it matter? But I remember a friend of mine said, I finally cleaned out my fridge, and now I know I can switch careers.
Wow.
And I knew exactly how that felt. And so you might not think that like, oh, if I clean out my garage, it's going to help me go to the gym. But it actually might. There is this weird connection.
It's funny you mentioned that. Whenever I'm stuck with like a writing project or something like that, I put away the dishes, I clean the sink, clean the kitchen. Doing some organizing always seems to free up some energy for whatever reason.
It's kind of uncanny, right?
It's pretty wild. I don't know what's going on there.
No, but I often do that. Now, sometimes cleaning can be a procrastination technique. Like you got a writing project and so you're like, well, I can't possibly tackle this writing project until I clean up my office and refile all my documents. Now that's, recognize that for what it is. That's
maybe there's a loophole there. Oh, well, I got to clean that.
Got to clean that. But so way to spot that is, once the project is over, do you still feel that cleaning impulse? Because once the project's done and it's no longer hanging over you and you're like, oh, I don't need to refile those documents. They're fine the way they are. Then you're like, well, that was just procrastination. Let's say you're sort of in a mode where you're thinking, you know what, I really want to tackle habits again, or I want to take another run at it. I've tried in the past and I haven't succeeded, but now I'm going to try these new strategies. I'm going to do something different. How can I lay the foundation? It might be that taking some time to clean out something, especially something that's bothering you. Like, do you have a medicine cabinet that can barely close? Do you have kitchen cabinets that you're just like jammed full of stuff? And you don't have to do like top to bottom. Pick one thing, one shelf, one drawer, one closet. And I don't really have an explanation for it other than I feel it. And so many people have told me that it kind of gives you this ignition energy that's really helpful when you're trying. You just feel more in control of yourself and you're more like, I'm in a place now where I can do it. I can go to the gym 3 days a week. I can meet my trainer on time. I can pack a lunch. And again, another thing too is good tools. If you have good tools make work joy. So, if you are going to be cooking, if you're going to be packing lunch every day, after you've done it for a while, say, okay, I'm going to get like a really cool lunch bag, or I'm going to buy good knives, because I really want to go deeper into this habit. I want to make it even more pleasant so that I stick with a habit that I know is good for me. I'm going to make it as pleasurable as possible by investing in the good tools that are going to support me.
And I can see that really furthering the identification with the habit as well. Now you're really kind of owning it when you're wanting to do it well.
Yes. Now, there are folks who, like I had a friend who, a housemate after college, where she would go through these kind of crazes and she would buy all this stuff.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Like, I'm going to start rollerblading. I'm buying the rollerblades and the pads and the vest and the cute shorts and the book. But then she never rollerbladed. Or like, I want to learn to cook Chinese and I'm going to buy the wok and I'm going to buy this and I'm going to I'm going to go to the special grocery store and buy all the spices. But then she never cooked. So this is something that should come after. This is like, okay, I'm doing this. I'm doing this. I'm doing this. Okay, now let's pour a little gasoline on that habit. But it's like, it's not preparatory, because you don't want to feel like, oh, I crossed that off my list, when really all you've done is bought this stuff.
You've got all the gear, but none of the action.
Yeah, but none of the action. So this is something that should be deeper. Like, I got this gross lunch bag that I have left over from when my kid was in kindergarten. Like, you could step up and buy yourself something nice after you've taken it to work for a month.
Right.
Don't go crazy at the beginning.
Well, Gretchen, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. I'm pumped up about initiating some new habits, and I know that I'm going to have a relatively easier time doing that because of my upholder tendencies. But for anybody who's interested in checking out all the great information that you're putting out there, GretchenRubin.com has links to your books, your podcasts, the quiz if you want to find out what your own personal tendency is. Gretchen, it's been a blast. Thanks again for coming on the show.
Oh, thanks. I feel like we could talk all day. It's so much fun to talk to you.
That was New York Times best-selling author Gretchen Rubin. You can get all of Gretchen's books, find the personal habit style quiz, and download her podcast, Happier with Gretchen Rubin, by going to her website, GretchenRubin.com. Now, before we check in with Stephanie Gaudreau about the hidden benefits of podcasting, I wanted to play you one more clip from my chat with PrepDish.com founder Allison Stevens-Schaff.
Yeah, recently there was a new mom, and she was just talking about how Prep Dish saves her time each night, and she said it's 30 minutes, and she said that may not sound like a lot, but she said she basically went through and gave us her entire schedule, how, I go to work at 7 a.m., I get back at 5 p.m., and because dinner's already ready, I have this 30 minutes of extra time to play with my daughter, and she was like, that is so amazing and worth the work up front. And even though it may not sound like much, she's like, I just don't have much time with my daughter. And so the fact that I get 30 extra minutes with her is so worth it.
1 month of PrepDish.com meal plans, $14. 30 minutes of extra time to spend with your child each and every day, priceless. And if you go to PrepDish.com/Paleo Magazine, you'll only spend $4 for an entire month of meal plans. Okay, so you know the deal. Now it's time for some stupid awesome info. I'm Tony Federico, and you are listening to PMR. All right, everybody, welcome back to another installment of Stupid Awesome Info with Stephanie Gaudreau. Stephanie, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, so today we're talking about making unbreakable humans. You want to fill us in on the details?
Yeah, so I have a program that I'm working on. It's going to be coming out in beta very soon, and it's called Healthy, Happy, Harder to Kill. And it's a program that I've been developing in my mind for the last probably 3 or 4 years. Hopefully we're going to be launching it by the summer, and the gist of it is that we're going to be giving people the tools to start addressing other aspects of their life rather than just food. And we know that certainly food is such an important component of a healthy lifestyle. But it's not just about food. Like, what do you do if you need to work on your sleep? And how do you start to reduce your stress levels? And how do you fit in healthy, like active movement or, fitness? And how do you address the mindset that goes into all of that? Because so often when I talk to folks or I hear from them on the blog or through the website, there's a lot of first of all, overwhelm. There's so many things out there, and how do you tackle all this at once? So the program's going to be stripped down. There's going to be one thing every day to do, and by the end of 4 weeks, hopefully you've managed to make some shifts in some of those different areas, so food, fitness, or mindset. One of the things that I hear a lot from people is not only is it sometimes overwhelming to deal with all this stuff, but they're like, oh, I started a program, but I couldn't finish. Or I want to eat healthy, but I keep falling off the wagon. And to me, if we want to build stronger humans, and that's in many different ways, physically and mentally and psychologically, we need to do it in a way that we address the parts that go into habit change and goal setting. And there's so many things that I can help people do to actually start following through with this stuff. And yeah, you're participating in a 30-day challenge and all that's wonderful, but now what tools are you going to take forward into the rest of your life?
Well, I see a lot of times people try something, just say a Whole30, something like that, and they make it 5, 10, 15 days in, and they've quit for one reason or another. And, I think they assume that they just didn't try hard enough. But I think, like you were saying, when you get just focused on the food piece, when you focus only on a shopping list and recipes, you forget that there's a person behind all this. And you can have the best nutrition plan, but ultimately a human being has to do it. And that's a much more complicated quantity than calculating macronutrients for your post-workout meal.
Yeah, and certainly if you're dealing with a ton of stress or you're not really sleeping well, these things are kind of overarching, and they're going to affect your ability to be able to follow through. I mean, if you're just feeling miserable because you're not rested and your stress levels are through the roof, I mean, all these things really work together and weave together to make this tapestry that we call life. We can't separate one thing out at the expense of the others. So I think getting into some of those other topics and having people really reflect on it is really important. I mean, you've been in this community for long enough. There's so many programs and amazing things that folks are doing, but one of my big things is I want people to reflect on the changes that they've made, in a real way. So not just say, oh, I did this program, good, I accomplished it, but really what changed for you?
Did you really move the needle?
Yeah, and so one of the things that I'm building into the program is really kind of a before and after assessment that's detailed in terms of not only your physical body, but your satisfaction with different facets of your lifestyle. And if any of those facets ended up improving or maybe got worse throughout the course of the program. So really making people sit down and do the work that's going to make the difference to say, wow, okay, I realize that I'm still struggling here. Perhaps this is an area that I need to keep working on. Or I realized that this particular thing doesn't really need all of my attention and I'm putting my attention in the wrong places. So I think it's more about being mindful
Sure.
and helping people to cultivate that mindfulness in a way that doesn't just seem to add a ton of random and, not really helpful things to their plate.
Because that actually kind of takes you away from mindfulness if you're attending to too much kind of external stuff.
We live in such an information overload age where we're constantly bombarded, we're on our mobile devices all the time. And while part of that is definitely tied to sort of living in this modern age, I think a lot of times we just get so caught up in the moment and we're so sucked into that stuff that we don't step back and really think, okay, like, is what I'm doing actually furthering me along, or is it actually setting me up for failure?
Right. You're maybe just in it, but not fully kind of conscious and choosing. I think a lot of times we just sort of, I don't want to use like the zombie imagery because I don't necessarily feel like that's the case, but I do think that there's maybe some conditioned responses. We just sort of kind of reactively go through life where we kind of go down an expected path, but we don't really think about it a whole lot. And there's plenty of things, like you said, whether it's our phones or other distractions that can keep us from really doing that deep thinking. So what you're suggesting is that we can really make some tangible changes, some long-term changes if we stop for a second and turn the lens around, don't focus myopically on our food, and think about what's kind of going on inside and how we're actually approaching all this stuff. Because ultimately everything that you do is kind of a reflection of what's going on the inside.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I think about is when you first start, say, eating a paleo type of diet, you really live by that yes and no list.
Right,
and you're trying to get your head around this paradigm of like, wow, I really need to change the way I'm eating. I'm hoping it's going to make me feel better. And so you kind of like really live strictly by this yes and no list. And then maybe you do an elimination protocol, or you do a Whole30 or whatever it is. And you find, well, like, hey, this food actually affects me a lot more than I thought, or this other food doesn't quite affect me as much. You realize that you can't live the rest of your life by such a strict yes and no list in many cases. There's, for some people, are definitely like, that food's totally not worth it. But the goal is to help people find a healthy balance between the foods that are overall going to make them healthier day after day after day, and the fact that there are special occasions and there are indulgences, and that's just life, and we want people to have an enjoyable life.
Kind of getting out of the black and white, trying to find comfort in the gray areas. And
just trying to figure out how to navigate your own life with this idea of how can I be healthier, how can I cultivate happiness, and how can I make myself so much stronger. And that's really, I think, what the goal of the program is to get people to think outside of that yes and no, black and white, zeros and ones type of list, and realize that life isn't always binary.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So when do you anticipate that this is going to be ready, and how can people get involved?
Well, I'm going to be beta testing it pretty soon with a very small group of people. It's about 25 people that are going to be going through the program and giving me feedback and trying to make sure that everything is ready to go and I haven't missed anything. And certainly I think that's important to give it a test run and make the necessary improvements. So that's going to be happening pretty soon. I've got some videos to finish filming. As far as the launch date, I don't want to interfere with anybody's summer vacation plans. So hopefully sooner than later. I would ideally like to get it out sometime around June, but we'll see what happens once I take all the data and do whatever necessary tweaks that I need to do. And I have a mailing list that people can find through my site where they can sign up to get updates, because this program is only going to be open for enrollment for a short period of time. So it's only going to run a couple times a year. And that way I can make sure I've got my attention and my focus on those folks. And we're going to have a Facebook group that's solely for people who join the program and giving them that extra support. So people can get on this mailing list to get updates about when things are moving along and rolling out.
Awesome. Well, thanks again for coming on the show, Stephanie. I'm excited to hear more about how we can work together to create unbreakable humans who are healthier, happier, and just rocking it, doing their thing and feeling good about themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
All right, Paleo Nation, that's going to do it for today's episode. Coming up next time on the podcast, former UFC heavyweight fighter Keith Jardine. After years of training, Keith was in a health crisis. Here's a preview.
After my last fight, I was so unhealthy. My hormones were all out of whack. I was like an 80-year-old man. I was just grinding metal for all these years, just too much overtraining, too much high sugar diet, and that riding that roller coaster and counting calories. Oh my God, counting calories.
To find out how Keith reclaimed his health and got out of the calorie counting, fat depriving trap that he was in, you're going to have to tune in to next week's episode. Obviously, the best way to do that is to subscribe. So whether you're listening on Stitcher or iTunes, hit the subscribe button, hit the favorites button. That way, the next episode is going to go right to your smartphone, tablet, whatever your preferred way of listening to podcasts is. Automatically, you don't have to do anything. You're just going to wake up and it's going to be right there. I'm Tony Federico, and on behalf of everyone at Paleo Magazine, thank you for listening.
If you would like to share your story on PMR, please visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/Paleo Magazine. For full transcripts of the show, as well as exclusive online content, go to our webpage, paleomagonline.com. You can also talk to us on Twitter at #PMRadio.